I'm Niki Ketchman, and this is my sculpture Corinthian. The word Corinthian refers to the very early Greek city of Corinth, and it still can be seen as a ruin, and there is a modern city of Corinth that's a few miles away from it. In Corinth, they made beautiful architecture and pottery, and in the architecture they used columns, lots of columns. The most ornate of the columns was called a Corinthian column, and at the top it had a design like this of acanthus leaves. This is my ode to the acanthus leaves. But the thing about this column is that it isn't only decorated at the top, it's decorated at the bottom. So why would I do that? Well, I have to tell you my process of making the piece for you to understand. I start out just doodling, trying to be in a very peaceful place, thinking of nothing, clearing my mind, and just doodling. Usually with a pen in a sketch pad or on a white piece of paper. And after I'm finished with it, I look at it, and sometimes there's a shape in it that seems meaningful for some reason that I can't describe. So when I find a shape like that, I then draw it a little bit bigger and enhance it and fuss with it and make it look the way I'd like it to look. And then sometimes I build something from one of those drawings. So you can see that the wire easily imitates the drawn line, the ink line. And the thing about working like that, when you're working from your subconscious, is that the Surrealists did it in the 1930s, first of all. They called it automatic drawing. And the thing about it is you're able to let your mind go and create something that doesn't ever exist. It never really existed in the real world. It's something new and different or modified. I mean, think of Salvador Dali's painting The Persistence of Memory, where he has clocks that are melting and dripping. Or Magritte's painting, he calls it Portrait. And it's basically a still life with a tabletop, a bottle of wine, a knife and a fork, and a plate. And on the plate is a big piece of ham. In the center of the piece of ham is an eye, a human eye looking out at you. So these are things that the mind can create that don't exist in real life. So why not have a two-sided column? And in addition to it being a column, you could also think of it as a formal dress. Or you could think of it as a stem with a flower out of each end, which is the interpretation that has it fit into this show called Full Bloom. And so the process of making this is a galvanized steel pipe around which I wound the wire. And here are steel rods that I welded to the pipe and a ring of rod. And then I weaved the wire through fencing that I attached to the rods. And it's just as meditative as the drawing, working like that. And so while I'm doing that, I think of time in some ways. The time in the history of art and the history of the world that I'm creating it, and also the time it takes to make it. And while I'm making it, you know, in Tale of Two Cities, Madame Defarge is knitting, 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 and she's knitting in it a code that tells which men are going to be killed next. Well, for me, embedded in this is what's going on in my life. Not that a viewer could tell this, but I can tell it. And what was going on when I made this in 1998 was that I was finishing a year of incredibly intense work, preparing for a one-person show at the DeCordova Museum and Sculpture Park in Lincoln, Massachusetts. And this was one of the last sculptures. I had made 8 large sculptures and 24 works on paper and an indoor installation of soft sculptures in the space of 1 year. So when I see this, I think about that. And then the show went to the Knoxville Museum of Art. Also, there's something in my personality that insists that I go over every inch of a piece of art. It's a way of caressing it, I think. I was a painter for 15 years, and I always wanted to make one of those big paintings with a big brush and abstract expressionist looking. And after 5 minutes, I noticed I always had the big brush in my left hand and a size 0 brush in my right hand, and I was going like that. And it's the same thing with the big sculptures. You have to work with small wire so that I can go over every inch and make sure every little spot of it just looks the way I want it to look. Some people say it looks feminine because it looks somewhat delicate. in today's world, I'll say that maybe it can go either way. Also, it's made of industrial materials, so even though it may look delicate, it's pretty tough. There's a galvanized steel rod in there, so it's pretty tough.
So did you walk all of the around it and around it, or how did you go up?
No, I have this suspended between two tables to wind the rod. I could rotate the rod and just hold the wire, and that's how I could get that wound. And the skirts or the flowers, whatever you want to say. I put it up on a table so I don't have to sit on the floor and work on the lower part, and then turned it over to work on the other side and worked around it. Had to start with the bottom one because you couldn't reach it once the top one's done. So,
And the middle?
the middle, I just suspended it from two sides before I had the bottom and top on, and was able to just rotate the pipe and hold the wire, and that way it wound around
So
it.
I imagine you just going around.
I still look a little dizzy. Any other questions?
Places where they pump water that way.
What?
There are places where they pump water that way.
Oh, yeah.
I miss what you said about the leaves. You made a comment about the leaves.
Yes, the leaves, I was saying, were my reference to the acanthus leaves on the top of a Corinthian column. But they could also be a trim on a dress, or the leaves up the edge of a stem where the flower is blooming. And you can see what I mean about detail, because the edges of these leaves are painted red.
Good shot.
I like all that detail. I think about beauty too, and as you know, I mean, you've heard the saying, beauty's in the eye of the beholder many times. The idea of beauty changes so much from time to time. Think these Corinthian columns were used in architecture in ancient Greece, but today it's glass and steel beams. And so our ideas of beauty change. And what I try to do is make it beautiful enough that it will seduce a viewer, come close and look at all the details and think about what it means. Any other questions?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Should we go over to the